Welcome everyone at the next multi-network community sync. Today we have January 8th. Welcome back everyone after the uh, holiday break. Happy New Year to everyone as well. I think it's going to be great 25 for all of us here. New things approaching. So I saw uh, other already we have some agenda. Uh, if you have any other items to add, please do so. Um, can you hear me? Because I don't hear anyone else, and I'm not sure whether I'm speaking
Yeah,
to
we
myself.
can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. So the first item, Antonio requested a check-in. I responded that the repositories that we created, we will be using them for this effort. We just need more time, but just to let you know that I did responded to this, and the repositories should be we should be used in future. All right, so that's one thing. I think I was not be able to participate in some of the early December meetings. Any news that we should that came out of this? I saw that we.
So for what it's worth, Bowie joined up and was really looking to move some things along.
Mhm.
So we spent the last few sessions catching him up. I think that one of the biggest takeaways from that discussion, he's asking, he's like, "Where's the roadmap?
Mm.
What's the to-do list?" Stuff like that. And I tried to point out that we're kind of at a crossroads here in a lot of ways, and kind of what we've been doing over the last few months
Yeah.
is what I was saying to Bowie. I was saying we're playing computer. We're kind of like running through how this is going to work, and then trying to figure out what's that gonna look like? So a lot of things are up in the air, related to notes from Mache around the time when you left to take some time, and we are kind of diagramming, what this looks like,
Right.
what level of abstraction, stuff like that. So we had a lot of questions about that, and then also he was saying he couldn't attend every session and was taking people's temperature on having it bi-weekly. So those were some of the last things as a quick recap.
Yeah. Yeah, we see you, Bob. I see you. So I think to that, I think that's a fair point to give some roadmap. I think that's something that we can come up with. I think at least with the state that we of knowledge that we have now, and I think that's a fair ask, Bowie. And let us work on that, and I will try to come up with something for the next meeting to present, and we can move from that. Then I think the first item this year that we need to work on is draft the design, right? That we kind of talked for the last few weeks or even months, probably the interactions between the APIs, the DRA. So we need to start kind of putting all the ideas that we had for the last few weeks into a paper and then float that around. So I think that's definitely the first ask that's on the roadmap. Um, uh, what else? I think maybe we can start with this one. Do we want to change this meeting to bi-weekly before we moving on? Um, Thoughts? Someone added that. I'm not sure. Doug, was it you that added this one or someone else? But that was on the agenda, so want to bring this up.
It
Uh,
was Yeah, it was floated in the last call, so I tossed it on to the next one. I think it might have just been Lionel, Bowie, NI than the last one. But
yeah, I think December is always the slow season, but I think we can pick it up from now on. I feel we can keep it. I do like our weekly syncs. Right now, I think we do have what to talk about still. Oh, okay. Is that why Bobek? Gotcha.
Also, I was looking at the agenda. It didn't seem like there was like a ton of stuff every week. So if you guys want to meet every week, that's okay. I'm
yeah,
just
we
putting out
I
there
think
that I can't do that.
Sure, gotcha. I think we had before that one, we always fill up the whole hour, right, guys? Before left, and I said I think the December I wasn't here to kind of try some of the things, but we usually had like the full hour weekly hours to discuss stuff, at least till now. I think we can keep it for now like that, and I think when we're gonna move to the more of an execution style thing, this is where we probably we change to biweekly, and discuss when we're gonna start discussing things in the docs. Then probably that could be the point where we can switch to that. Okay, so for now, if we're gonna have less topics to talk in the next like 2-3 meetings, then yeah, we can definitely switch to bi-weekly. All right, Lionel, I added you as the next one. This was in the next item in the next section for this one. So go ahead.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what was.
I saw about this one. This was from the last meeting.
I think it was some draft from previous discussion that we had where we were representing this resource claim template as a network, and we wanted the resource claim template to be created from the pod network object, something like that. And then, if I remember correctly, my idea was to not create the object, but instead just the pod network pointing to a list of resource claims that the pod should have claim to be considered in this pod network. So it will be just some kind of selector that says these pods are in the network if if the pods are claiming this resource claims.
But then that would mean we are exposing the array to the user, right? In
Yes.
that manner, right? Is that, I think this is what we kind of wanted to avoid, right? Last time we talked about this. I'm referring back to I think to this picture that where we wanted to kind of present, and basically then the user is only responsible for the pod network, right? I don't have the color scheme, but I think that was my idea, where I think color coded, how it's color coded. The pink was what the multi-network creates, the blue what user creates or handles, and only this. The black ones are just what is auto-generated. This is just part of the array, and the red ones below, this is what the implementer provides, right? If they have anything, then the implementer provides the red boxes. I think that was the division, and you would think to put user responsible for the pink one. I think last time we discussed, I think this is something that we didn't take on. Let me find the TRA reference somewhere here. I think what we were missing is what was that? I think that
it was the
request
part.
Right. No, the requests values, right? The scheduler parts was, as we discussed, was covered by the resource slice, right? And this is fully controlled by the implementer and can fully control that one, right? What's available where? It's, I think what was missing is we would hard code, I think this piece, right? And most of these pieces will be hard coded, right? What I'm highlighting here of the template, right? Because we definitely provide all this. This is a copy paste of the OPEC from the pod network, then just the request. But then I think what is being requested, that would be just copy pasted and hard coded, right? So some of those pieces would be hard coded and we didn't have those exposed. But the question was, do we really need to expose them, right? We will always just request one of this OPEC device and that's it with the class name that you specified, right? I think that was the kind of the current trade-off, right? Where this will completely then obscure the DRA from the user and we end up with just the pod network as a front end. And you're saying that we could, so kind of to reiterate what you were floating to, instead of making the pod network as a front end, let pod network just indicate, point to some of the DRA elements, which will be then deemed as a specific pod network.
Yes.
Something like that.
Because the resource slice is not, from what I understood, is not enough to indicate the scheduler. You need in the request of the resource claim indicate some set expression that says the device should have this kind of attributes.
But I assume then, let me think. That might be true, but I think, won't that be just, I think what you're calling out, and because keep in mind DRA is very flexible, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, DRA, the template, can define multiple devices, and then with what you're saying, that the additional cell expression can further filter out what exactly do I need out of those lists. And we are saying that you will not have that capability. Your device has to be more narrower, right? Rather than a big bunch of, let's say, oh, I want all my one template to represent all my SROVs. And basically with this, we are saying, no, you can, my all SROV interfaces, right? And then with the cell, I can choose, okay, I want Intel or I want Mellanox, right? Let's say that. And what I'm saying, no, don't do that. You don't have that power. Create a template per Intel, per model, right? Per make. So you will make a template for separate template for Intel and separate template for Mellanox. You see that? You see my point, Lionel? I think this is what the difference will be. Is that, I know it's maybe more bit troublesome, but then I think what you're asking for is just gives you more control, and especially that control is needed if you request probably multiple resources at once, which here I'm not sure whether we should. It usually shouldn't be the case here, right? We usually we're gonna reserve like one device, right? You see my point?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how this selector works for the request, so I cannot really
okay
say.
And that's fair. This is something that I might be vague as well. I'm kind of hand waving here a bit as well. That's fair point. But I think what is on mine as well, kind of agenda, to kind of create some sort of POC out of this whole thing. So basically this approach, right, where we have all those pieces that we can see here that's being copied over and transferred to the DRA driver, to have this kind of somehow POC'd with the pod network defined, so that we can see what we end up with and what might be missing, what you're saying, calling out, right? So that's something that I definitely want to do. That will give us more data on, are we missing some of those pieces, right? And are we missing on some of the features of DRA that prevent us from doing some of this? And then I think that will have to be some sort of trade-off, I think, at that point, right? Because we need to focus on networking here only, so that's kind of limited, because if you just want to use DRA, then just go ahead and do that, right? And additionally, the DRA aspects has to be network skewed, right? Because then we want pod network to represent a network element, so that then it has to have an IP, and then I can use that as a backend for my service, right? or a endpoint for my network policy, right? So there is.
Do we know if you have multiple kinds of requests? Let's say you have a multi-network and GPU.
What do you
That
refer
becomes a
to? What do
problem?
you mean? In here,
Like,
yes.
you want to request for a pod, a network, and a GPU.
That is possible. Yeah, that's what the whole NVIDIA is pushing for. That's why the kind of, as you can see, this request is a list. At that point, yes, right? At that
I know,
point,
but like, if we take over that part of it, like, how would that composition work? If you hide DRA, like, is that possible? Is that present problems?
and that's where I think that might be the gap, right? Request a, because this is where the kind of composite request from DRA comes in, which do those fit towards multi-networking? Well, that's, I think this is where I'm putting the question for, right? Do we need to cover that? Because then, yeah, is that a pod network if I request a GPU? You see my point on that? You see that? So this is where I know, because it's one of the use cases that DRA represents, but the question would be, is that a proper pod network that multi-network should handle, right? Because, you know, the use cases, is that the use case that we would want to cover here with this? If you want to composite network plus a GPU, is that a pod network?
But I mean, yeah, isn't that like a legitimate use case? Like, AI ML is blowing up, so I hear.
Right.
So people tell me.
Yeah, I think this is one we should consider. And I think it matters. And I also think it's a complicated question, right? Because we're looking at how much do we abstract this? How much do people who are allocating GPUs that now want to express the GPU plus network, if we can enable it, how does that look? How does that experience translate for somebody who's setting that up? How do we define that role and what that story looks like?
Okay, no, that's fair then.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether what could be done, because the multi-network resource does would be the one responsible for filling out the rest of this template, right? We give the power to provide the OPEC stuff. I wonder whether we can control that via a class or something. Keep in mind, we have the flexibility of a struct and what the class gives us, right? And maybe then, based on the class and some specification, we could add that, right? And say, okay, you have to have in your class OPEC some additional parameters that will state that I will request more, right? We could do something like that, right? So I think this boils down to controlling how we create the pink one here, then, right? And that control can be done through maybe through this OPEC or the bottom OPEC. That can be an option as well, right? Where we expect, if your OPEC, one of those two, has the section of the request, we're just gonna, instead of creating our own, the standard one, we're just gonna put yours. You see that? I'm not sure did I convey that. I'm not sure whether that's hacky or not. But one of the ideas as we go, right? I'm not sure you followed what I was kind of conveying.
Yeah,
here.
maybe you have to write it out.
Yeah, it's true. But basically, keep in mind, we do allow the provider and the user to specify OPEC struct, right? And those can be anything. And basically, you could as well include some. We can define some keywords that we would support to control the pink section in some ways, right? And that will be more advanced user, like for the GPU use case. So I think we have means to control that, considering this is just whatever you want, and we could just need to define what those have to be, and this is just give some ways without maybe this can be going to the device class, because then that's on implementer side. They have to be more advanced and aware of how multi-network works. And then in the class, they will say, oh, I have a, let's say, IML class device, right? And it will call out some of the additional controls in the OPEX section that will control properly the ping section, the ping object. So I think we have means to control some of those items. So yeah, I think we can look at it that point from that. I think one goal I want to keep at is kind of hide from the end user the array pieces, right? Because then it's just basically the array at that point, right? You go and do that. The OPEX tract over here is whatever the provider defines, right? And it should be kind of straightforward. At that point, this should be easy, and that's just the documentation of the implementers. So that's not a big deal. I do not want to expose user to the resource claims template and all the other items.
Question. To come back also to the idea that I proposed just before with the selector. If we expose the array part, we could still have the possibility for the provider, the pod network provider, to create the resource claim template for the user. So it's not the user itself that has to create the resource claim template. The network will be created, and then reconciler or controller will create the resource claim template for it. That will like fill all the OPAC parameter and the I don't know, scheduler fields, etc.
I think that's true. At that point, though, I think you're right. I think that's something that we can look at as well, because then, okay, that's your claim. Someone created it for you, pre-created, and then just go with that. That's a fair point. Yeah, we can go both ways, because this is kind of fits towards the same thing, right? Where I wonder whether there's other things to this. We have to look at, because I want to ensure that pod network has a availability status, and whether this model can be still fitting towards that. In terms of availability, it's whether I can attach a pod to a pod network or not, right? You controlling this template might not give us the control to do that, right?
Right, but we can have some kind of selector that selects the pods that are in the network, and we create some kind of endpoint slice that lists all the pods that are within this network. And if this network is disabled, we just flush this endpoint slice.
So I think this is what you're calling out then is the linking the pod network to endpoint slice, right? But endpoint slice will then, because right now with your status change in the resource claim, right, in this guy, having the network parameters, then the endpoint slice will be created out of those, right? And now we just need to know.
I didn't mean endpoint slice itself. I mean a similar object has an endpoint slice that will just list all the pods that are within this network, and we list all the IPs and all the relevant fields for it. And
but it will be used for services and anything. That's endpoint slice. Well, why create another object?
Because endpoint slice is for service. Here it's for a pod network. We can have multiple services on the same network, and they will fetch the IPs and all the pods in that new list, in this pod network list or whatever.
But I think there is unnecessary, intermediate object that's, that way you have a unified picture on endpoint slices are created off of resource claim now, right? And the statuses of IPs over there. and that's it, right? We just need to ensure the resource claim might need some sort of a I wonder whether there needs to be some sort of a linkage, right? Because we need to call this out to a specific pod network, so the endpoint slice knows, okay, this belongs to specific network, right? And then whether we, because what you would think, I assume what you're getting at is have a object that lists all the IPs that pod network selected, and then out of that create your real endpoint slice. I don't think that's I think we can do it in one go without the intermediate object, right?
Yeah, just to have a state of which pod are in these networks, and then if we have this enable field, if you set it to false, like the list is flushed.
Oh, you can get rid. Oh, you can disable that. But I think existing ones enable. Keep in mind, enable doesn't affect anything what's existing. You can never do that, right? Anything in Kubernetes API doesn't function that. If you have if a pod links as config map and you delete the config map is still used by that pod that already uses it. So, and here we're gonna use the same approach here. If a pod uses a pod network, disabling it doesn't deem the running pod gone or disabled. It still will use the interface. It only prevents creating new pods. That's always what it is, Lionel. So that's what you said. I don't think we would want to have that. You need to keep the state of the existing situation, right? You cannot just, and I don't think multi-network should delete a pod because the pod network got disabled, right? Of course, an implementer can probably do that and implement something like that, but I don't think that's Kubernetes-like to do something like that. But I don't think there's anything blocking any specific implementers from doing such thing, right? Like, oh, you disabled a pod network. I will delete all your pods because the pod network is not there. It's a bit destructive, but I don't think it will prevent you from doing that. Yes, that's a fair point. But I don't think that in general, I wouldn't recommend that, right? And because of that, and that reason, removing a list of IPs that belongs to a pod network is not, that's not, you remove the state of current situation. So basically, you're breaking you're breaking the representation of the real world, right? At that point, so we shouldn't do that. I don't think so. But I think what you're saying, to have a pointing to template, it is a possibility. I would shelve that, if anything, as a maybe next step or a future improvement in terms of limiting scope at that point, though. If anything. Any other comments to that? I think that the resource claim, we kind of went through, I think, the picture and plus the idea of resource claims. I think, Lionel, I do feel that that's a fair point to have that template pointing to the template. Any other questions to this? Okay, so I think the next pointer is to start the doc. Yeah, I think I will try to kick that off. I was supposed to do that probably some time ago as well. So let me try to kick off that guy out of the docs that we kind of created before. Let me kick off some draft of for that, and so that we can start writing down stuff and commenting on it. There was
one recommendation, if we don't want to write a doc, is to just have like a slide animation of how it works.
No, I think, Bowie, no, we need to have a doc now.
No, I'm just saying, like, if you want to not have to write a full doc. I don't think I will have the whole thing. We can say, like, hey, this is kind of how it works.
Oh, okay. That's what you mean, like a one-pager of what currently
It's
we
like
are
an
thinking.
animation of like, here's the
I see.
pod, and you configure this, and then you could do this.
Yeah, I think this is something that probably needs just more description.
Right, but that's
this. Yeah,
probably we need to map it to as an example.
Yeah, fair. Okay, yeah.
Just instead of a Google Doc, could we maybe, or should we start having the enhancement proposal in the multi-network repo instead, having some PRs and maybe the...
I'm not sure which one is easier. I prefer commenting on a doc and having that finalized and just copying to the GitHub. You find GitHub PRs easier to handle?
Anything is fine for me. Just if there is too many comments,
my,
GN is laggy.
Yeah, I think like, is this at that stage where it's reasonably like done?
Yeah, that's what I would like to have. The doc is easier to modify and all that. No PRs, no pushes, and then comments and what's not over there. It's so much faster through doc. I think when we have a good consensus of what we want to be in the doc, let's go to PR and push it there. Yeah, but by the way, Lionel, that's my ultimate goal. Yes, the repository for multi-network, eventually that's the main thing that's going to be there, is that design doc is the core for that. It will be the kind of cornerstone of that repository. That's definitely that. But I find like, let's finalize the doc, or at least have some idea on it of what it has to be, and then push it to PR. That's that I would want to stage it. And I know there was another one on me again. Let me try. Okay. I think what's next is the NRI. I think, have you added that, Lionel?
No, I don't know who, or I don't think it's me who did this.
Or maybe I was the one that added that. I think that's something that we have not, because that was the next step. So we have kind of the general gist of, I think that was me. Now when I think about it. So we talked more or less about how the control plane would look like, right? So we have all this, we have the resource claim. And then basically I would like to talk on and walk through what is then the kind of the recommendation for implementers. Is there anything we need to do to have that enabled, right? Lionel, you did the POC. So this is where I'm kind of looking at you for that point on, is there anything on the Kubernetes side we would want to push to kind of ease our work here, ease up our work? I think this is something on a connection between as well the container D, probably. I'm not sure. The CRI does that have any play here? I'm a bit vague on the NRI interface here, so that's why I'm kind of hand waving a bit here. But I would like to walk through here on, okay, we have this whole objects defined, nice and dandy. So what's next? How do I write the DRA driver, right, to get this passed into the pod and created an interface, right, into the pod? We have your POC as one example, and probably that's where you and yours, you have a repository creating some of this one of the CNIs for this. But I wonder whether there is anything that we would have to push in the Kubernetes. Do we need to create some sort of cap to kind of ease of some of our work here?
I think the CNI driver, the repo that has been created recently, will be the reference implementation for using DRA and NRI together. And if something is missing in that part in Kubernetes, we will detect it, and then we will try to push it at the same time.
Oh, okay.
No.
So you're saying the CNI? Okay.
For multi-network, probably the CNIDR driver can be a reference implementation at the same time.
Right. No, definitely. I'm seeing yours implementation as the thing that I would like to use for testing, like to create end-to-end test. What's not? Let me say
The part that is missing in NRI and in container D or other container runtime is the ability to disable the primary CNI and to use NRI for the default network. And in NRI, what is missing is the ability to set the pod IPs. So
I see.
You inject the default network in the pod via NRI hook when the pod is created, and then you set the pod IPs in the pod status.
I wonder whether we do we need that? Do we still can we move away from pods the IPs on the pod status? I wonder is anyone else beside the I assume pod endpoint slice is using it. Then the network policy is using it today. And then what's next? Is it used for like exec into the pod? I wonder. Is that used by Kubelet for that? Anyone knows?
Yes,
I wonder
it's used
what.
by Kubelet health check.
Oh, health check. Oh, I see.
That has to be fixed. Like that, there's like a proposal to decouple Kubelet health check from all the networking jazz. But I don't know, and I would love to see this happen actually, but I don't know what the current state of it is. Let me see if I can find it. So the CNI to NRI bridge, like, is there a succinct statement of what is the difference between doing it in CNI versus doing it in NRI? And having NRI call CNI?
Like, the way it is done today is via Multus. So, I mean, the container Ds should call the primary CNI and Multus take the place has primary CNI and call other CNI behind. So it's just used as a hook when the pod is created. And NRI like provide this real hook on run pod sandbox, pod deletion, container creation, etc. So it's a bit cleaner, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the primary thing, I think.
And any update, Lionel, on this on this effort that you can share? I'm not sure anything
Just
happened.
like
Probably you were busy last holiday season, what's not, but
I created a pull request for the specification of the API and the configuration of the OPAC parameter, etc., and how the result will be written by the CNIDR driver. And my next step is to work on the scheduling part. The implementation should not be so complex for the configuration part, I believe. Yeah. Configuration, implementation, and scheduling are my next step.
All right. All right. Anything else to add about this? And we still have a problem with here, what you said, the default network the scheduler will still try to run the CNI, right, in this here. So I think the other thing is how to handle the CNI. Why I'm saying this, keep in mind that the goal is all networking is done through this. Everything. There is no default CNI. I pick the first CNI config from the /etc CNI path. That should go away. I think today we would have to do some sort of dummy, create, start, and shut down, and do nothing. I wonder whether that has to be somehow modified.
Sorry, I want to understand that. So,
Mhm.
are we getting rid of CNI, or is this
So
like a
keep in mind this
special
whole.
case if you configure it like that?
So pod network is a, let's say, it add-on. It is an add-on. It's like ASM, right? Or not ASM. Sorry, Istio. You add Istio to your Kubernetes. Maybe that's not the best example, but some add-on to your or gateway API, right, as well. So this is the same thing with pod network. Is an extension to your Kubernetes, and one of the pointers of that extension will be your networking is done through pod network from the beginning, right? So if you don't specify a resource in your pod, you will not get any network in your pod, and basically the pod will not start until you specify a pod network into it. There has to be some
Well, I understand. So by
some
default,
restrictions
or like an
and some
extension, because that sounds like the
simplifications.
opposite.
Say again.
That sounds like the opposite. Like we're saying it's an extension, but then you're also mandating adding a pod network.
Because it's an extension, we are not mandating it on just on the Kubernetes. When you enable this extension, this is when we mandate some of the things. That's what I'm getting at, boy.
Okay,
because we cannot.
That sounds like not an extension. That sounds like a mandate. You're saying enable on the cluster, or like what? Where would you enable this?
Yeah, enable. So, okay, with enabling of this extension, the requirement is that the CNI is not the main. I see what you say in terms of do you need to enable something in the CNI driver to support this, but this is something that we need to kind of iron out some of those items, right? But I think the end goal.
Why is that a design goal? Because it sounds hostile to like interoperation with everything else.
To ensure that there is only one way to define the network. Otherwise, now how do we the interop between this and the CNI, or we need to define that, right? Then, but then it's tricky, right? Because that's the point of this effort, right? That pod network takes over the whole network, including the default one, right? So now how we do that? Now
I'd say there's like two defaults. There's a default, as in from the pod's perspective, the default network, and then there is like the Kubernetes default network, and it's not entirely clear that we need to take such a strong stance. Like from a container,
I'm not sure how
like
we can
when I run stuff, and maybe I say, yeah, I don't want the default network for this container to be literally the default that comes with Kubernetes. But flipping it around, it's like, why have to completely remove the default network that Kubernetes comes with?
So I think what I'm getting at with this is to ensure that the default for multi-network represents your default of Kubernetes, right? I think that's the thinking.
Which can be done without necessarily saying you can change it.
And that's fair.
Level,
and that's like fair. But what we need
it.
to ensure the path to configure this is the same then as we do for the other, because then I would not want, for example, if enable multi-networking, right? I would not want the what I'm getting at is I would not, maybe the goal here would be I can create a pod with just non-default in network.
I think that's fine, and we should like. I just want to tease apart like a mandate about everything,
And the
versus
mandate
from a
is coming out of that,
particular
right?
container's perspective.
Sure, but then
Like it's like it might be easier to solve one problem than the other problem, right? Like it
what
might
do
be
you mean?
more
So
tractable.
maybe.
What I mean is, like, for a given workload, I can say that the default network for this workload is something. Whereas it's like, if we say the default network as defined by Kubernetes kind of implicitly everywhere throughout the system, now it has to be a thing that then can be like mutated and all that stuff. That might be hard. That's like, might be way harder. And it's like, do we need to necessarily solve that problem to solve the other problem?
We need to ensure that we disable it in the case where I want to connect to the non-default.
Right, which is the first thing I was referring to, is like, for a particular workload, it doesn't just always just get that default network, right? Like you can replace that one.
And the way I was thinking about that one is you don't specify it, right? I think what you're calling out, can we have an option to, okay, because then my question would be, how do we indicate that, right?
So I think I mentioned earlier, like the last session, that it was like, oh, what if we have like start container with no network? Like there's like host network, and then there's also like no network, which doesn't exist. And obviously there's issues, especially with the kubelet health check and stuff. But that one seems like it's more okay, I guess get to the bottom of what I'm saying is that to do that, you might have to end up introducing things into core. And then the question is, what is the smallest thing you can introduce into core without getting down the same path that's just like, oh, and then this is dependent on this, and then we have to introduce this.
So, and that's fair.
Like,
and that's but basically I want to, but that's why I'm bringing this up, right? How can we do that, right?
Yeah. So
my first idea was to, okay, let's, when you introduce this, let's disable the CNI, and as you deploy this, we create it. The deployment of this extension comes with the default network as a first object that somehow references whatever you have in the cluster as a default.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, do we need to be so drastic? Could we do it on a per workload basis? And maybe that's an easier interoperation. I just think about your users, like you enable this thing and then they have to rewrite everything, versus they might have some specialized workloads that require the specification. Everything else is kind of like, just leave it alone. Like you can use your Helm chart, right? Like you can do that stuff.
The way it was. That's a fair point, right? But then we need to figure out how do we, then we would probably have to have a special cases for those standard workloads, right? In somehow in the way we handle them for all the other features. Keep in mind, we want to build features on top of those, right? This thing, and then
but
you would have two ways to handle this, right? You will have a way to, okay, oh, this is the default one, the old style. Okay, we do it that way, but for normal, do it this way, right? That's what I'm getting at, because this is where we end up then with. That's why me pushing to be so drastic, I have then everything done one way, right? Otherwise, I have to then worry about two ways, things being done two ways. I think that's the trade-off, one of the trade-offs at least.
It seems less clear to me, because the default network is special because it's default anyways, and you're not going to have two defaults.
And that's fair. Yeah, and that's true. I definitely, you mentioned something that I can replace the default. That's definitely, I don't want.
But then it's the new default, right? It's like you can only have one of those.
Yeah.
So it's in some ways it is special.
And that's true, and that's fair, and that's definitely it will. That's why it gets created, probably with the deployment of this extension. But then we need to figure out how to, okay, how we do it, right? How we transform that into this. And I think for me, the easiest would be to, okay, let's disable.
Yeah, I think if you could put an example, because once you replace the default, the old default is like disappeared, right? So
right,
you get what I'm saying? Like there's only one default. It's like there's only one king. Like,
yeah.
You get rid of the king is the next king. The previous king is like, I don't know, somewhere probably in the ground. But like you can't like talk about two kings.
Okay, no, that's fair. I think that's something that I think the POC that we want to do, I would like to do to get this kind of started would show that, right? I think that can be iteratively. First, I want to focus on just, okay, I would add an interface into a existing pod with the default CNI, and then how far I can hack to ensure that we just add the interface, right, without the default CNI, or what can be done to kind of hijack that and represent it through the default pod network that we would introduce. So that's something that, yeah, that's something that we need to, I think, then look into that. And I don't currently have no other ideas on how this could work and be done. I think this is something the POCs would have to step in and show us some path.
Right.
But
I think
that's
like,
that's a
where
thing that we need to solve.
Okay, that's what I'm saying is like that's where we might want to have some core modification or something, but
And I yeah, exactly. I would like to avoid that, but maybe some small changes are possible. But yeah, we need to come up with something. Maybe there is something that maybe we can tweak something here and there to allow us some of those things. Currently, I don't know what that can look like, unless someone else in the room has some ideas or
You mean
yeah.
So I think let's go through the example first, because it's once you jump into the API definition, then you kind of get a little stuck. So can we walk through like what the use case looks like, and then we can
So I
figure out
think
what.
I think our initial principle from what we had was all networks that you connect are listed in the pod. I think that was our initial statement from last year. And right now what we are saying, pod lists resources, right? So this is a pod level resource, not container, but pod level resource that you list, right? And basically, if you don't list any network, multi-network, if you have this enabled, multi-network enabled, and you don't have any multi-network resource listed, your pod cannot start because you don't have network connected to it. Or maybe you support such case where pod doesn't have a network. I don't know, but that's
like,
the gist, right?
That's that's okay. I think it sounds like it would work. I'm just saying it's like a little bit. It imposes a lot on folks who are using it. Let's say you have like a specialized set of nodes that do multi-network stuff, and everything else is kind of like the same. Like you would have to rewrite all your config for everything, and you can't use a Helm chart, I'm assuming.
So this is where maybe a webhook we add. If you don't specify anything, we infer you definitely want to have the default, and we just say, okay, add the default resource to ensure that all the pods have that. I think one problem what you called out will be with that. Okay, well, what happens if I install? And on the installation to the cluster of this, what happens then? Do I reset all the pods so that the webhook kicks in and adds the default? Maybe that can be the thing, right? Adding multi-network to a cluster shouldn't be, I don't think this should be a non-interruptive operation. So it should be an interruptive. It's a big thing.
Yeah, although historically, like, making it that makes it harder to use. But I'm just saying, like, it has like, ideally the implications wouldn't be so big. Like, what happens to the pods that already are running?
That's what I'm getting at, right? You restart the pods, right? And the webhook is there.
I mean, you literally have to just kill your cluster.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting. Maybe that's so, but that's going to the use case, something like that, right? Where, okay, I want to maybe before, because I'm kind of inclining on how do we install and bootstrap this whole thing. That's yet another issue that we have to figure out with this. But let's shelve that. But let's assume everything
sounds like we have to solve it though.
Yeah, some definitely. Yeah. That's something that has to be solved. But let's say we have everything installed, and now what happens, right? We have a pod spinned up, right? And I was thinking about the webhook idea, because if you don't specify anything.
Yes, it's a
you
way to
assume-
do defaulting. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You assume you want to have a resource. So that's why even if you use a Helm chart, you're good, because then we will implicitly add that.
Yeah, I think like
resource.
it would really help to understand the use case, is because it's like you could have a pod network that says I am the default network, right? And just be like, that thing exists because it always exists.
No, so then that's different, right? Something that I am for the specific pod. Is that what you mean?
No, I'm saying like you could just synthetically generate a default pod network. It's the question is like, yeah, I'm just a little hazy on kind of how this is brought up. Like you would have to create the pod networks and then you create all the pods. It just sounds.
Yeah. This will be part of
sounds
the.
tricky to me.
You're again leaning towards and going back to the bootstrapping. Let's assume. Because you try to solve how the bootstrapping could look like, unless.
But I'm trying to understand like what is the use case where we need to do what you're suggesting. Again, like
to
getting
unify.
back to an example
I think the use
useful.
case is to ensure it's not maybe a. No, the use case is to ensure that when you enable multi-network, all networks for pods are defined through the resource, right? I think that should be unified. It shouldn't be like.
Which is to do something. Like, what is that something?
It's either to do something is to add the resource to the pod, right? A networking resource to the pod, if you want to have a network, right? And then if you don't specify one, you attach to the default, right? That's the use case. If then a user wants to connect to a specific set of interfaces, they explicitly call them out, including the default, right? If they want to connect to it, because if they in the list don't include the default, we don't infer that you do want to add it. We will not add it. That's the way how you not opt. How this is
okay,
how you opt.
So that's
out
one use case is like you want pods to be able to exclude the default network.
Yeah.
Okay. There's other ways probably to do that, but let's go with yours for now.
I'm not sure what other ways.
Okay. But let's just write down as that's the requirement. Are there other requirements and use cases? That's what I'm getting at.
I think that's where I'm bringing up all the requirements that we defined like 2 years ago. Those are the requirements.
I understand. Are there in that list that you defined 2 years ago? Are there other things that you want to do as well in addition to that one? That specific.
Yeah, I think I'm calling out most of that. I think that the first phase of those requirements exactly calls what I'm saying, right? And this is why I'm pushing towards that, because those are the requirements and the use cases that we defined 3 years ago. Yeah.
Okay.
I think
it would be good to understand what other use cases there are for that, because there may be ways to get that without necessarily.
All right. Yeah. Let's maybe then continue the discussion next week, because that's exactly those are basically devils in the details, kind of things that we need to figure it out in the design that can move on. Right now, I am gonna kind of rely on what we initially had in our CEP, because it is based off the requirements that we had and defined in the early phase of this whole effort. And yeah, I think that it
would be good to understand though, like, because if like what to get into core and to avoid it, like in avoiding global flip, right? Like those are all good things. And if here's a time to fix it, if we don't necessarily need to go a particular direction.
And right? That's a fair point. Yeah. All right, folks. Let's continue next week then. I think there is stuff to discuss. Definitely. All right. Thanks everyone. See you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.